Welcome everyone to this evening's presentation of Shelter Rock Forum, which should prove to be an interesting and challenging program this evening. If you don't have a religious home, we ask you to join us here on a Sunday morning. Our services are 11 o'clock. We have concurrent religious education programs from children 2 years old up through high school and infant care as well. And during July and August, our programs on Sunday start at 10 a.m. So, without further ado, I'm going to call on Victor White, the chair of Shelter Rock Forum, to introduce this evening's program.
I'd also like to thank Latifah for putting this program together. I'd like to thank the people in my committee for the work that they've done to make this possible. Okay, Jeff Vesco unfortunately wasn't here today. He's in Texas. I think he's fighting the floods down there. He's with the people fighting them. Wally Brown is outside collecting money. Joe Mines is still in rehab. John Tilden is also outside, I believe. Rosalind White, she's the one who will kill me if I don't mention her name. And Latifah, of course.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It is a pleasure of mine to see you all here gathered on this rainy but wonderful evening, or should I call it afternoon. With that said, I would like to introduce our dear, the one and only girl from Long Island, the Daisy Khan, who is the executive director of Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality. The short form is WISE, a global grassroots social justice movement led by Muslim women. In 2004, Ms. Khan launched Muslim Leaders of Tomorrow to cultivate the next generation of Muslim leaders. In 2006, Ms. Khan WISE formed the Global Muslim Women's Shura, which is called the Council, to promote an ethical and egalitarian Islam. The Council's first statement, Jihad Against Violence, Muslim Women's Struggle for Peace, combined a study in condemnation of violent extremists in domestic violence. Ms. Khan has dedicated her life to promoting an expression of Islam based on culture and religious harmony in building bridges between Muslim and the general public. She's a regular media commentator, a contributor to documentaries on Islam and Muslims, and a recipient of numerous awards, including the Interfaith Center Award for promoting peace and interfaith understanding, the Edinburgh Peace Award, the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award. Time magazine named Daisy Khan one of the top 140 best Twitter feeds of 2012. And Glamour magazine listed her as one of the 7 women you must follow on Twitter. So here we go. We are all going to follow Ms. Daisy Khan on the Twitter. Don't forget that. Born in Kashmir, Ms. Khan spent 25 years as an interior architect for various Fortune 500 companies before committing to full-time community service. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome our dear Daisy Khan, a friend and a wonderful contributor to the peace and social justice of not only in the United States, but in the world. Thank you for coming here. And now Daisy will introduce our other guests.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's true, I am a Long Island girl, and if I actually lived in Long Island, I would be a member of this congregation. That's how much I love this congregation. I want to thank Victor White for facilitating and bringing this entire thing together. I want to thank Latifah for jumping when I mentioned to her that my dear friend, Jamila Afghani, will be visiting from Afghanistan, and she has a great story to tell, and so does Dr. Kitch, who actually wrote her story in her book. And I'm grateful to the committee for putting this all together. And yesterday I was in Long Island with my family, and my niece came over very quietly, and she said, I was reading the Newsday, and all of a sudden my aunt's name was there. And there was actually a very big ad in Newsday. So whoever does your press, thank you very much. Tonight's conversation is not just a conversation with me, though I will get it started up, but it's really with Dr. Sally Kitch and Jamila, and about what's really going on in Afghanistan. So that will be the lion's share of what we'll be talking about. But I will set the stage for the global conditions of Muslim women and what is going on in the various countries that we want to focus on today. As you know, there are 53 Muslim majority countries in the world, and we can't talk about them all, so I will just, for the purposes of this event, only focus on a few. Democratization, human rights, and enhancing the position of women are at the forefront of the stated U.S. foreign policy. In fact, the United States has frequently employed the alleviation of Muslim women's suffering as a critical foreign policy objective. During the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan, for example, the horrific human rights record of the Taliban, which you will hear about from Jamila, particularly concerning Afghani women, was considered as an essential element of the declared necessity of invasion. I don't question the intentions of these efforts. They are good. However, I am convinced, and as are my sisters around the world, that politicization of Muslim women ultimately harms American foreign policy goals. In the US, Islam and its teachings on women are often conflated with the actions of Muslims. I don't blame people for this misconception, because I recognize that the misunderstanding and misinterpretation of Islam is often misused to justify the exploitation of women. Absence of religious legitimacy and sensitivity has consistently hindered real social change among Muslims. I am convinced that our best chance to combat these injustices and abuses is to construct Islamic arguments. And we must dispel the notion that to fight for women's human rights and to be a feminist necessarily means working in spite of Islam. What we have seen in places like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Afghanistan is only the exploitation and deep misunderstanding of Islam and our Prophet's core teachings. Furthermore, efforts to fight for human rights remain hampered by their connection, their very deep connection, and you will probably hear this from Jamila, to negative attitudes towards American foreign policy and the perceived imposition of Western values on Muslim lands. So what happens is women become the core of these debates in the Islamic world and are at the centerpiece of preserving tradition and maintaining Islam. So we become the football that goes around on the playing field. Although Muslim women have led 5 nations, and you've seen them, Benazir Bhutto, huge countries like Turkey, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Muslim women do confront gender-based discrimination and inequality. So you may be wondering, why is that when we've had 5 heads of state and we still don't have one in America? The truth is that Muslim world is a vast and varied landscape. The realities of women in Egypt, for example, are not the same as realities of women in Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Afghanistan. So to investigate the status of women in Islam, one must start with a look at the realities of Muslim women from a theological perspective. And that is the work that I have chosen to do for myself, to peel away the onion. If it's one faith, why is the reality of one woman in one country so different from the reality of another? And of course, the classic case of why can't women in Saudi Arabia drive while women all over the Muslim world are driving? Is it a different Islam? Or is it Islam? Or is it culture? When I began my own struggle and my own education of what is the issue at the heart of this, I was really comforted by the fact that gender equality is an intrinsic part of the Islamic faith, and that as women we hold fundamentally an irrevocable value and rights in Islam. And you may be thinking that I'm just telling you this, but the truth is, in 640, there was a woman who used to sit by the Prophet And, she was one of his companions. And when the verses were coming down, they were almost all addressing men. And she had the guts to get up and ask the prophet, who was a prophet of God. She said, why does God only speak to men? Like, we're women here. We're with you. We're by your side. We're fighting by your side. Why is the Quran only speaking to men? And the prophet didn't have an answer, and he was shocked. So he waited, and he didn't know what to say. And a verse came down. I guess her query went right up to the divine throne, and a verse came down and said, for Muslim, this is God speaking now, for Muslim men and women, for believing men and women, for devout men and women, for true men and women, for men and women who are patient and constant, for men and women who are humble themselves, for men and women who give charity, for men and women who fast and deny themselves, for men and women who guard their chastity, and for men and women who engage in God's praise. For them, God has prepared forgiveness and great reward. So God didn't make any distinction between a man and woman. He said, if you do all these things, you're equal in my eyes. In addition, the prophet was a feminist of his time and a sincere activist for women's rights, and he always tried to improve his condition. The strong-minded women in his life encouraged this feminism. For example, his first wife of 15 years, Khadija, a prominent woman, a businesswoman, and a powerful woman, gave the prophet his first job as a trader. And later, she was so enamored with his honesty and his good looks that she actually offered marriage to him. And she was 40 and he was 25. And he had a monogamous marriage in a place where there was no concept of monogamy. For 15 years, they were married together and had four children. More importantly, she provided him critical financial support during the periods of this severe persecution. Women such as Khadija, as well as the Prophet himself, represent great exemplars of faith and feminism in action. Why then do today's women in Saudi Arabia suffer from this lack of mobility? Why is it that when, during the time of the Prophet, women were riding camels, they were actually fighting the battles alongside their menfolk? Why can't women today be treated the same? So I boiled this down to one thing, because part of the initiative that I started, I actually began to bring women from different parts of the world together. And we have a very large group in Saudi Arabia. So I asked my sisters in Saudi Arabia, what is at the root of this problem? And they said one word: guardianship. We are considered fundamentally the weaker sex. And the weaker sex needs protection. And the weaker sex cannot defend itself physically, mentally, whatever. And so therefore, our mobility is we are in this perceived protection. We are supposed to be protected, so either by, the guardian, who might be the father, or it might be a brother, in some cases even the son. So if you don't have a father and you don't even have a brother, you have to ask your son's permission for everything. So although women have all the freedoms to seek education and they have masters and everything, but when they actually get their own businesses, there's a glass ceiling and they cannot pursue their business aspirations. So this has created kind of like a society which is skewed and not in line with what we consider to be core principles of Islam, which is all women are equal in the eyes of God, and these sort of tribal customs cannot trump religion itself. I know there'll be a Q&A and there'll be many more questions about Saudi Arabia, but I'm trying to give you a canvas here. So as for Iran, which is now the opposite, which is Saudi Arabia is predominantly Sunni, so you have Iran, which is predominantly Shia country. Women participated heavily. Do you remember in 1979, those of you who've been around as long as I have, you remember those chants of those women coming up in their black chadars? Well, they heavily participated in the Iranian Revolution that toppled the Shah. They chose to wear the chadar as a sign of protest. And in fact, right now, a lot of women all over the Muslim world are actually choosing to wear hijab as a sign of protest in countries like Turkey and other countries, and even in countries like France, where they feel that their religion is being attacked. Because the first Shah Pahlavi banned the use of hijab, many women decided to show their favor for Ayatollah Khomeini by wearing the chador, thinking that this would be the best way for them to show their support without having to be vocal. The chador also enabled them to be a unified force, feeling equality among all classes of women who were fighting for the same cause. But that didn't last very long. Guess what happened? After toppling the Shah, Ayatollah Khomeini severely curtailed the rights of women, guaranteed under the Shah. So all the rights that they had been given already were taken away from them. Within months, the family protection law was repealed. Female government workers were asked to observe only Islamic dress code. Women were barred from becoming judges. Beaches and sports were sex segregated. The legal marriage age dropped to 9 and was later raised to 13 because 9 was the age of puberty. And as long as you hit puberty, and puberty comes much later for boys than it does for girls. So if you hit puberty, that was also an Islamic law thing. If you hit puberty, you're marriageable. So, and then women were barred from attending regular schools. In spite of all these prohibitions, women said, where can we look for our empowerment? So they found the open door, education. And they all started enrolling like crazy. In 2006, women account for well over half of the university students in Iran. Now they have an explosion of highly educated women. They don't know what to do. So the conservative mullahs started shaking. They were so alarmed that they came out publicly and said the large female enrollment could cause social disparity and economic and cultural imbalance in this country, especially between men and women. But now what are they supposed to do with all these women who are so highly educated? Iranian women have been influential in the sciences, winning medals. We have Anush Ansari, who actually became an astronaut. She lives in the United States of America. We have an Iranian woman who's an astronaut here. We have women who have become mathematicians and have won medals. We have women in Iran who are in the sports field. And so, and they continue to excel. So, when the presidential election came along in 2009, they thought, let's do it again. Last time we toppled those guys, let's topple these guys. So they went on en masse, as you know, to vote for Mir Hossein Mousavi. And then they were crushed, and their votes were stolen, and Ahmadinejad won, and you all saw that. Many of these girls who were so empowered from within, borrowing from their oldest thing, they were highly educated, charged up women, wanted to change the world, were thrown into jails. One anonymous woman recalled what happened to her in prison, and she said that one of the prison guards said to her, I will do something you will never forget. I'll make it so that you never want to leave your house again. So anytime you hear my name, you'll tremble. And in the end, these women lost. But they've all taken to Facebook. They've all taken to Twitter, and they're using other mediums to get their voices across. Iran has produced Shirin Ebadi. She's a Nobel laureate. Even she uses Twitter and all these other accounts to defend human rights. And of course, today they continue to blog for entertainment. They share stories and even trying to start their own movements. But we don't know what will happen to the women of Iran. And I certainly hope that these are the kinds of people that we need to support. And of course, when our foreign policy goes at odds with the country, it invariably affects these people who are trying to create the change in the country. In Egypt, many years ago, well before 1951, there was a woman named Doria Sheikh who was not happy with the status of women. She managed to get 1,500 women together and stormed the parliament in 1951, demanding full political rights, a reform of the personal status law, and equal pay for equal work. I think we need to bring her back to the United States here right now, right? And she wasn't satisfied, and she didn't get everything she wanted, so she went on a hunger strike for 10 days and continued to bring more women along with her and protested, and women were not permitted in certain spaces, and they staged themselves out there. But eventually, she relented and fought with Nasser and everybody else, and significant equal rights were granted to women during this period in education, in workplace. And that is what gave rise to so many empowered women of Egypt that I know personally. I mean, Egypt has 27,000 NGOs. This is like a country of NGOs because they opened the pathway. They said, oh, you want to work? Go do social work. So you have all these NGOs that are being run by women, very capable women. And they even gave them the right to vote. But in 1980s, when they saw the rise of the Brotherhood and they saw the rise of extremism, it was women that came together again, said, not these monsters, these guys are not good for us. And they formed groups where, of faith-based feminist groups, they came together and said, Islamic feminism is what is needed today, a feminist discourse and practice articulated within the Islamic paradigm. That was a major shift because up until then, it was almost entirely a secular agenda. What year was it when Tahrir Square happened? 2011. So, these women were so accustomed to creating change in their societies, and this is a culture that comes from, the pharaohs on the one hand, but they also have queens. So they have, women are accustomed to being in positions of power. I mean, I have a mother-in-law who's Egyptian. I have sister-in-laws who's Egyptian. Let me tell you, they rule the house. I mean, these are not pussycats, And then, January 25th happened, and there was a group of people that said, enough about Mubarak. 40 years of the same guy. Why is it that this country is the only country that is like, living under this authoritarian regime for as long as he has? And there was one woman who had seen what happened in Tunisia with a man who burned himself alive, and the revolution began in Tunisia. And same thing happened in Egypt with another young man who, out of desperation, tried to replicate what this other man had done. And so she was so mortified by that. She went, and this was a young activist, 25 years old. She may be 26, but somewhere around that age. She got up and she took a video camera in her hallway of her apartment, put the camera in front of her and spoke directly to the camera, as if she was speaking to the whole world. You have to see it. Her name is Asma Mahfouz. And she just said, oh, you people of Egypt, because she had just heard that a cleric had condemned this man for burning himself. He said, you will go to hell, because he issued a fatwa against, committing suicide. And she saw the hypocrisy in that, because these same clerics had given the free rein to suicide bombers, and here was a man who had killed himself out of desperation. And so she went in that, standing on moral ground and moral authority, and she spoke to the people of Egypt. And she said, come out and protest. Come out on Tahrir Square, all of you. I am going there on January 25th. That is how the revolution started, ladies and gentlemen. It did not start with that man who was the Google executive that you all heard about. It started with this one young girl who dared to speak and hold up the mirror to that society. And it is said that 500 people, Egypt is a very populated country, so 500 people is not a lot of people. You can get them together. 500 turned into 5,000 before you knew. Everybody was rolling out, coming out, and the square got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, same thing that happened was that revolution started, women came out, children came out, it normalized the revolution. People thought this is a people's revolution. We all saw images of it, didn't we? Babies coming out. How nice was it to see entire families coming out? But guess what happened? The men stole the revolution from the women. Once again, you began to hear stories of sexual exploitation. You began to see these same women who had dared to stand up were told to stay home and go inside. And the same story, once again, the whole revolution gets reversed, and these women are nowhere to be seen. They've lost their rights. They're no longer, all the gains that they have made are receding. I know that Afghanistan is very close to my heart, partly because of the person I'm sitting in front of. She has opened the window for me into Afghanistan, but not just that. Afghanistan is my own sort of, it's near my homeland, but a piece of me is Afghan also. I happen to have a little drop of Afghan blood in me from my mother's side. So I always consider myself, it's an affinity culture. I understand the people, I understand what's going on. So when that country got torn apart, it's as if my own country got torn apart. So I'm not going to tell you what happened in Afghanistan, because there's a great book that has been written about Afghanistan by Sally. And not everything is bleak. There are great successes going on and great strides being made by very, very courageous women. And Jamila Afghani is one of those courageous women. So I thank you for the remarks that I have made. We will now open up to a lively discussion with these two wonderful participants who are here. And we will speak about Afghanistan, but the Q&A will be about all the countries that we have spoken about. So I'm so thankful to Dr. Sally Kitch. So I will start with her. How on earth did this project begin? What was the inspiration behind it? And what inspired you to write this book?
Thank you, Daisy. I also want to thank you all for being here, and I've been so delighted to learn about this congregation and its social justice activities. So I feel very honored to be here with you to talk about this book and to provide some context for Jamila Afghani and her work. So how did I come to write this book? Well, on September 11th, 2001, I was like most Americans, I think, or many, in that I had to look on the map to see where Afghanistan was. It was definitely not my area of research, although I had been a women's studies scholar for many years by then. But my focus had been on US history and feminist cultural theory, and had worked mostly with people from the 19th century who were no longer with us. But on that day, I realized that I was making a terrible mistake to be narrowly focused on my country. And one of the reasons I was making a mistake was to see how involved the US was with the rest of the world in ways that its citizenry did not understand, and I didn't think that was a very good thing. But what really motivated me to do something, to get out of my comfort zone, was a speech that was made by Laura Bush in November of 2001. I don't know if any of you remember that speech. But it was the one time that a First Lady actually gave the Saturday radio address on behalf of the President. And I think it's the last time. I don't think it's happened again. And the reason she did it was because they wanted her to express one particular sentiment, and that is that we were in Afghanistan, we had invaded Afghanistan the previous month, and we were there to fight terrorism and the Taliban, which seemed to be the same thing. And we were doing it in large part to advance the rights and dignity of women. And I did not think that what we were doing was necessarily moving us in that direction. At least I couldn't understand how it was. And I was a professor at Ohio State at the time, and I called together a group of colleagues with an interest in gender issues and women's rights and social justice, and we began meeting and asking ourselves, what is it that we could do? We don't have any real means of saving Afghan women, and we don't even know if they need to be saved. We don't really think that what our government is doing is necessarily going to help. What could we do? And we decided that the thing that we could do that our government did not seem to be doing was listen to Afghan women. In other words, instead of business as usual, in which women's roles and rights and responsibilities are debated, but without their presence, what we call in my field about them without them, we decided to try to get with them and just listen. And so eventually we were able to contact a group of women leaders in Afghanistan, and we invited them to Columbus, and they came. By then it was 2005, and we listened to them for 5 days. We had them on panels. We asked them to speak to certain questions. We interviewed them individually. We recorded everything. And about 100 people came and went to listen to them over this period of time. And we learned an enormous amount. I certainly did. Two of the women during that time stood out to me. One was Jamila, who had started an NGO in her early 20s when she was a refugee in Pakistan, and was continuing to work on that NGO, the Noor Educational Organization at the time. Now it's the Noor Educational and Capacity Development Organization. And Judge Marzia Bessel, who was made a judge. She went through law school, and then she went through judicial training. She was declared a judge in 1995, and as many of you know, in 1996 the Taliban took over, and women were not allowed to have any professional occupation. But she had persisted, had run a secret school, had worked for several international organizations. She was actually caught by the Taliban when she was running the school, and the story of that's in the book. She said she'll never forget it. And she had started the Afghan Women Judges Association in Afghanistan. And this was, I mean, I knew about it by the time I met her, but when I first heard about Afghan women judges, it didn't quite compute with what the media represented about Afghan women. These two women, to me, were representing two of the most important kinds of work that could be done to advance social justice and certainly women's rights along with that, and that education and the rule of law. And so I asked them if I could stay in touch with them, and I did so. We met again in 2010 in Istanbul, and when we met together, they asked me if I would be interested in writing a book about their views, because it was their belief that those views were not being represented. And it was clear to me that that was the case. And even though I was there to get their views, I didn't feel that I had the standing to write a book about them. But with that request, and with their willingness to risk their lives to tell me what they wanted to tell me, because when I offered to treat them anonymously in the book, they both refused. And they said, well, they'll all know who we are anyway. So they were knowingly risking themselves to speak out openly. I thought, well, I will have to find the position from which I can write this book. And for me, it was very important for that position to be one of complete respect for what I was hearing, and to not have the imperialist mentality that says, my life must be better than theirs. They must want to be like me, if only they could. I was determined that that wasn't going to happen. And as a result, the book reflects mostly their lives and their views, how they came to be the leaders that they are, all their views about various political events in Afghanistan, and the future of Afghanistan and Afghan women, which I know Jamila will talk more about. As well as a little bit about my relationship to all this, like who was I? How was I learning? What was I thinking about as we were engaging with their ideas? And there are 2 chapters in the book on marriage in which I reflect quite a bit about both their views of marriage in general and their own marriages, but my kind of comparing it to what we think we're doing in the kinds of marriages that many Westerners enter into. And I began to see similarities that were surprising to me. So that's a long answer to your question of how I came to do this and what I hoped to accomplish. In addition, I added my own scholarship about the history of Afghan women's rights and the role of the West in sometimes not promoting them, even though we're saying in 2001 that's what we're all about, is to promote women's rights and dignity. And also future ways that women in particular, Western women who are interested in women's rights and feminism might engage with this most important question, gender question of our time.
Thank you, Sally. Dr. Kitch says that she wrote this book to tell about those views that were not represented in the past. I'd like to first start with you, asking you about you, Jamila, the person. Just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you came from, how did you land up in a refugee camp, and what has been your experience, not only as an Afghan woman, but as a woman who's trying to raise 2 children in Afghanistan, your personal story before we get into really the major issues of the country.
Well, I'm first of all thankful to all of you making this opportunity to be among you. I really feel honored and privileged. And I'm very thankful to Professor Sally Kitch that she brought our voices through the book she has, which was one of my dreams. Who am I? I'm Jamila Afghani. My name is Jamila is given by my family, and Afghani is selected by myself. I never wanted to take my parents' or family name or my husband's family name. I wanted to be Afghani. Afghani means for all Afghanistan, to represent all people of Afghanistan. And to have my own separate identity. I didn't want to be recognized by name of my father or by my tribe or by my husband. I wanted to be a person by myself. I grew up in a very rich family, in a very traditional family. My father was one of the richest person, almost among 10 top businessmen of Afghanistan during Zahir Shah. And we are from Ghazni province, one of the very conservative community, but we came to Kabul and my father was settled down there because of his business. When I come to the world after 6-7 months, I got polio. Having a daughter and having a disabled daughter was a bit shame for my family, for a rich family, that they were thinking that they are perfect, there should be no shortcoming in their part to having a disabled daughter, so it was a little bit shame to them. When I was growing up day by day, so I was hearing this conversation that who will marry her? She will be a burden, and how we will do with her. Like my father spent big sum of money on my health, on my treatment, but it was the God will that I should remain disabled. But all this environment and the environment, like my mother was suffering and my sister-in-laws were living, receiving very harsh treatment with all the wealth we had in our family. And I was thinking that I should not be burdened. I should be the person to help others. And I was sticking to my education. And it was also shame in my family to let their daughters to go for education. But due to my doctor advice that she is not able to play or go somewhere out, it's better to send her to school for initial 1 to 3 years. When I got to school, so I found that this is my world. This is what I need. This is my enjoyment. And when I was in 4th grade, my uncle came and he was shouting at my father and he was telling him that you have become communist, you have become kafir, you're letting your daughter to go to school. And I was requesting to my father, just one more year, just one more year. And until I got up to 6th and 7th grade, and then my father said, I will cut your finger. Every year you're saying the same thing, just one more year. And this is that you're going to complete your school, which was the first woman in our family. So the condition was changed in Afghanistan and we had to leave Afghanistan and we migrated to Pakistan, and then it was 1988, 89. And it was a good community where there were several opportunities for Afghan refugees, like some educational activity by ICRC and some others. And the love I had for education and for school, I was trying to seek help of my sister-in-laws and continue my education. And of course, my brother didn't want me to go to school because of the environment we had. It was a big shame for girls to go to school. So finally, I learned that how I can make myself strong through support of my sister-in-laws. I was very kind to them, to their children, and I was trying to teach their children. An incentive, they were helping me. They were hiding me when my brother were coming and asking, where is she? So they were saying, she's sleeping. She's in the toilet, she's taking bath. Or she has gone to her uncle's house. They were making some excuse to not let my brother to know that I'm going to school. This way I completed my school and my college. And I did some extra activity. And I also studied medical science for 4 years. And I did computer classes, everything. It was early 2001 when, due to the rule of Taliban, lots of Afghan people migrated to Pakistan camps. And in one day, 36 women and children died due to hunger and heat. And that was my last semester in my master classes. I was doing my master in international relations. Then, through support of other friends, we start campaigning in the camps, in the cities, for those who were living in the camp. We were collecting materials, medicine, food item, and we were sending them over to the camps for the families. And it was amazing, just within a period of 20 days to a month, we could provide help and support for 7,000 families. And the 7 girls we were working we had in a way or other way disability. And when we sat back and we saw that we have this power that we can do, and lots of people supported us and our teachers. So it was the idea that we should work more in a form of organization. While working our social activities in the camp, we thought with ourselves how long as a beggar we should ask others to help us, and as long as a beggar we should treat our people. They are bringing their harm to us, and we are bringing our harms to others. Why not to do something to make our people to stand on their own foot? So we found that education is the only solution, the only long-term solution for all of us, especially for women. So we started our organization by giving the name of Noor, which means light Education Center. And we wanted to help our people through the light of education. And in 2002, after Peshawar, after the political scenario that you all know about that, 9/11, I was also shifted in Afghanistan. And even sometime I say before Hamid Karzai was sitting in his office, I was there. And even in a day, like I was searching for a little bit of a stationery to establish my office, I was not able to find a few pieces of paper. It was that condition in Kabul. All the streets were full of broken mirrors and all the walls were shot with bullets, and it was very bad condition. But still, I was there and I started my work there. And the notion that always in my life, learning from my own personal story, is always to light a person. When you get the enlightenment, you will be in position to enlighten others. I believe that if you light a candle, that candle will be able to light many other candles around. And in a day or in a future, you will get situation that many candles will be lighted and there will be bright environment. So this way, more longer than your description, the question. So I think it's enough.
So, Dr. Kitch, Americans went to Afghanistan with 3 stated goals. You know, Jamila talks about lighting the candle, spreading the light. That is what we went to Afghanistan for. We said we were going to demilitarize the entire country. We said we were going to free the women from oppression. And we said we were going to defeat the Taliban and get rid of Taliban, who, you know, by extension, Al-Qaeda. So have we achieved our goal?
Well, if our time's running out, I would just say no. We have not achieved those goals. In some ways, we've exacerbated the problems that we thought we were going there to solve. As you know, we stayed much longer than anyone dreamed. I think President Bush was quoted at some point as saying that it was going to be 18 months, and we were going to, wasn't that awe and, what was it? Shock and awe, that everyone's just going to, all the Taliban were going to see the light, speaking about light, throw up their arms and say, oh, the great power has arrived. Of course, we're going to disband and all become Americans. Well, none of that happened, of course. There was a huge disconnect between the historical and political understanding of our leaders and the situation that was on the ground. I would like to elaborate on just the women's rights part if we have time. One of the things that I learned through the process of researching this book and simply my relationship with the Afghan women that I came to know is that the West has been involved in Afghanistan for a very long time, and we have been implicated in women's rights issues over many of those years. And that, in fact, as we think about women's rights, both in our own country and everywhere else, we have to realize the extent to which they play they are political footballs. And they've certainly been a political football in Afghanistan, and Americans and the British and the Soviets were among the powers kicking them around. And we did it quite knowingly. So that for our First Lady to stand up and say innocently in 2001 that we were there as true Americans fighting for women's rights just like we do at home and so on, is very disingenuous, because anyone who'd scratched the surface of our involvement would know that during the Cold War in particular, and that's not the beginning of it, but it's perhaps the most exacerbated moment, we knowingly sacrificed the rights that the Soviets had actually granted women or exemplified for women, and instead chose to battle the communist-inspired regime. They were not actually, it was not actually a Soviet occupation, the way some of us learned that it was. The most important thing to us was to fight that party, and we did it by supporting the most regressive Islamist forces in the country, the Mujahideen. And it wasn't an accident. I mean, we knew. And we further knew that in doing that, we were helping to taint the very idea of women's rights as communist in Afghan thinking, which was a very convenient weapon to give to conservative cultural forces who would then be able to say, as somebody, you were quoting, somebody telling your family they must be communist because they're letting their daughter go to school, so that those things could be combined and became a more powerful weapon than a man just coming up and saying, you know, in my culture, my cultural values, you shouldn't send your daughter to school. But to say you're a communist and you're sending your daughter to school makes it even stronger. The US played a role in this, and we backed, of course we all know that we backed Osama bin Laden, that the weapons that the Mujahideen used were later found, a cache of those weapons was found by the Taliban, and so those were arms that were being used finally when the Taliban came into power. And then furthermore, we didn't do anything about the Taliban until 2001. And we had opportunities to, and we had activists in this country, the Feminist Majority Foundation, for example, was successful in getting President Clinton not to back an oil pipeline through Afghanistan that would have further enriched the Taliban. But it took some effort to do that. But even with that kind of activism, we didn't know at all what we were getting ourselves into. So when we arrive innocently saying, here we are to save the women of Afghanistan, we didn't know what we were talking about. And even though we may have had a window of opportunity after the temporary fall of the Taliban in 2002, we squandered that window so that we did not help to build the institutions that could have been built in that period. We did not take the opportunity to build upon the foundation of activism for women's rights and social justice that was already in existence in Afghanistan when we invaded. We didn't engage with those groups at all, with those women at all. Nobody knocked on Jamila's door, which was already there when President Karzai took office, and said, you've been working in this area, tell us how we can most advance women's rights and social justice. Nobody did that. And there were many other organizations that were also ignored. So that's why I say no to that, women's rights in particular.
So I'd like to open this up to the congregation here to ask us any more questions. But before we do that, I'd like to ask Jamila one more question, and that is, did you ever imagine that there would be peace talks going on right now and Taliban would be part of those peace talks? And what's missing in these peace talks?
Well, unfortunately, throughout our history, women used as a political tool for the political gains of different parties and different factions. Nobody listened to us, but they are using us very openly. As Professor Sally mentioned about the reality that nobody listened to us, even forcefully we were attending some conferences and we were raising our voices, but nobody was saying anything to us. At the end of the day, they were saying, oh, she's feminist, she's Islamist, she's wearing chadar, she might be linked with Taliban, that's why she's talking, so don't listen to her. And one of the faults that international community, and especially US government and Hamid Karzai government in the beginning, that it was pushing back the religious community into a corner. Whoever was wearing a turban or growing beard, so people easily were saying it's Talib. Or even when we were wearing our chadar, this is my style, and Islamic belief is my personal issue, my personal choice, but we were set back. So one of the reasons that Taliban got very strong again, it was because that religious community, Taliban could utilize the religious community and convince them that, look at these Westerners are against you, against your religion. And that's why they are killing us and pushing us back. And slowly and gradually they got strong. Coming of Daesh to Afghanistan might be known to some of you, or at least most people, because this is a concerning issue for all of us. And now Daesh is getting very strong hold in Afghanistan. Some of the reports says that the former Taliban is going to fall back themselves in the shape of Daesh and ISIL. And some people say, no, Taliban are against them. Now they want to confront a new enemy, and they are coming back towards Afghan government to share a part of government with them. Whatever is the situation, as we are everyday suffering, whoever is killing and dying in the part of Taliban or in the part of Afghan army, they are our children, they are our brothers, they are our bloods that we are shedding every day, and we want to stop all these, and we want to come to a solution. The current peace talks which took place in Qatar, Taliban did not said anything about those 3 women who were attending the conference, like they didn't reject. And one of the fear the Afghan government had when we were talking to them that we want to be part of the peace process, and Afghan government said possibly Taliban will sit back or they will walk away if women are coming on their agenda. But apparently what we saw, it was different. The other concern that we have, that these peace talks are going to be done without a practical representation of women. Who was those 3 women attending the peace conference? Nobody knew them. They were not activists from the civil society. Even 2 of the women, we don't know their name and their representation at all. One of the women was from government employees. At the end of the day, as a symbolic, they decided that on this discussion there should be a few women, and they recommended a friend of them or a family member of them on this peace talk. But when the Taliban showed their willingness to sit beside women and talk about peace process, but there was no voice of women. We are 50% or even more than 50% of our population. And like me, and even 20 years ahead of me, 10 years ahead of me, there were many other sisters who were working. We have almost lost our youth. We always lost our good days, like fighting, struggling. At the end of the day, nobody's listening to us. This is a major concern for us. And currently now, Talib looks like a full plate. So China is interested to hold some meetings, and Iran is also interested. And we are very concerned that women voices are not there. Hopefully, through support of some actors like UNAMA and Afghanistan High Peace Council, we women activists, we are trying to push them that this time and any other upcoming meetings, there should be some women representation there. Because the peace talks are making our future. And this is very important for us.
Very briefly, you started your question by saying, did she ever think that this would happen? And I have to say, yes, she did. When we were interviewing in 2010, both she and Marzia were terrified of this happening. And what they predicted was that the first thing that would be on the table would be the Constitution. And that's what the news media are telling us, and women's rights or equal rights on the Constitution. So yes, she did predict this.
Okay. I would like to give an opportunity to invite some of you to please ask your questions. I'm sure there must be a question or two.
Ned White, I'm just wondering what kind of support is there amongst the imams in Afghanistan for women's rights? And is there a texture of diversity in the Islamic communities throughout the country where there can be some allies?
So I'll just start with that because I know that Jamila has a lot to say about that issue. In 2009, we had a conference in Malaysia, and I think this is in the book, right? You write about this in the book. So quick synopsis of it is, we had a young lady from Philippines who was talking about how fed up she was of domestic abuse justified in the name of Islam in her community. So she sought out an imam who was a friend of hers, and she asked him, she said, what can we do? And he said, well, what do you want to do? And she was an Islamic scholar, and she said, you should talk about this at the Friday sermons. And he says, well, write me a sermon and I'll talk about it. And she did, and it was very well received because the sermon was very well written, and he got a really good response. And then he said, you want me to talk about anything else? So the long and short of it is, she wrote about 60 sermons, and then she went from imam to imam to imam to imam, just roaming around. He pointed to her to the next imam. Jamila was in the room, she heard that, and I don't know how long it took you, 6 months or so after that. I remember getting an email from her saying, I think this might work in Afghanistan. And she'd been pondering this, and it was a case study. And so she said, maybe I can try this out in Afghanistan. And we were fortunate enough to have a little grant, and we said, let's give you a grant, and we'll help you with capacity building, and we'll help you with evaluations and monitoring. And her sister from Philippines gave advice, free advice, and Jamila got the program started. And she's been running a fantastic program, training the imams. And she won't tell you this, but I remember in the beginning, we were talking about how is she going to do this? She's a woman. I mean, at the end of the day, you're bringing these stodgy men with outdated attitudes towards women, and she's supposed to train them? So I remember we strategized, and we came to a strategy. Put your husband in the front, let him do all the trainings, because he's very supportive of her work. They work together anyway. And he's himself an imam. And he will do all the trainings, and you'll just sit in the back and you'll observe and make some good tea and, the social part of it. And this is exactly how the program got started. It was very stealth. Nobody knew that we were behind this. We didn't want the recognition. We just wanted her to succeed with her program. So there was no American link. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm an American, but I'm also a Muslim sister sitting across the pond here, wanting my sister to succeed. So we continued, and then we continued, and we have so many impactful stories. Some of them are in your book, right? So much impact. She has been able to change the people. Now the imams get up when she walks in the room out of respect. Then we pushed the envelope, and we said, Jamila, can we get women in the mosques? And so she convinced them to even start women's sections in the mosque. There are women's sections in the mosque when it was unheard of. Then the imams told her, by the way, now that we have a women's section, you've created a problem. We need a toilet for the women. So then she called and she said, we need a toilet project. I said, wait, stop right here. We're not doing that. But I want you to tell this in your own words, because I'm sure I don't have all the information.
As a person, as a woman, when I was facing so many hurdle in my family, facing my brothers and my father. Always I had to get 6 times permission to do something. First of all, I had to take permission from my father, then my first brother, second, third, fourth, until fifth. In between, when one of them were disagree with the point, so all of my plan was ruined up. So I thought it's better to learn my religion by myself, because always they are saying from Islamic point of view, it's not good that you should go out or you should do a study. So I learned Arabic language to read Quran by myself and to see what Quran tells me. And when I did this, I found a very different picture of Islam, very friendly, and even sometime, right now even I believe the Quran has come down right now for me, for the need of this time. So, coming to the Vice Conference in 2009 and seeing different friends, different sisters from other Islamic countries and the sister from Philippines, it really touched my heart. Because we already were doing some activity with imams, but I didn't know how to do it. But that conference showed me the way how to do it. So we started our work with 25 imams from the very famous mosques of Kabul. And we tried to involve the imam through the process, that they should not feel that we are teaching them something, but we tried to make them that they should feel ownership. Like initially when we developed the manual, and we had to share the manual with the imams, although Shura Council was helping me how to develop the manual and how to edit with some more information on that. We put the manual in front of imams and we asked that, look at brothers, you're religious figures. You have very upper hand, upper knowledge. Look at this material. Is it good and helpful in our community? While reading and giving their comment, so they were learning something new. And this was the very first step that we took. After that, when they come to know and give their comments on the manual, after a while when it was completed and we give them 2-3 workshops, then after that we request them that you should now share this information with your community, especially in Friday sermons with other people. But as a women activist, I was not sure whether imams are going to keep their promise or not, because I know my people, my country. So I was thinking, if I go to every mosque by myself and check, it will be very big sum of work. So I thought another idea to bring some monitors to go to the mosque and observe the imam. And I thought it's good that from Kabul University dorms, we should select some youth. Usually they are living in Kabul on Friday, they have nothing to do, and with the small step nets, they can do this work. This was not part of the proposal that we shared with Dizzy Khan in the beginning. And later on I said, Dizzy, this thing is coming in my mind, that might be helpful. Then she said, yes, you can do this. And we provide some training for these youths about monitoring and report writing. And we send off these youths to the mosque to monitor the imams. According to my expectations, of course, some of the imams were not keeping their promise. So next day we conduct another meeting. We invite head of the mosques from Ministry of Religious Affairs, from Ministry of Women Affairs, and all the youths and all the imams. And we told the imams that after this, youth will come regularly to your mosque to monitor about your Friday sermon. And the imams got to know that these are not the ones to do some short activity and leave the ground. These are those stubborn people that will follow up. And this was a very turning point in our project life. When the monitors were going and attending the sermons, first of all, they were learning. And they were coming from 16 provinces. And from the other side, imams were feeling responsibility to keep their promise, because there was somebody to pass their information to us, and we were responsible to pass the information to Ministry of Religious Affairs, from where they are getting their monthly salaries. And this way, when imams start talking about women's rights and human rights in sermons, of course there were many, many questions. And even in one of our report was mentioned that an old man came in and said that, why you were not telling us all this before? We thought it's part of our manhood. I thought it's part of my responsibility, and now you're telling me that I have committed sin and I'm going to answer God. I never allowed my daughters to go to school. I never let my children to get married according to their choice. And his daughter-in-law was died because he did not permission her to visit a male doctor. And now, of course, it was very late for him, but the Imam says, we have to start from a point. And now that Imam has become the most active women's rights and human rights advocate in the community. He's going and knocking each and every door in the community that send your daughter to school. He has 5 sons, and every son has 2, 3 daughters. He's sending all of them to school. And he's very actively working on polio, vaccination, election campaign, everything, in order to compensate the sins he had committed. The issue that to work with imams, I never put myself in front of them because I knew that it will be challenging. In one of the conferences that I was doing the opening ceremony, where we had 100 imams from around Afghanistan, and we had scholars from Indonesia, Malaysia, and Egypt. On the opening ceremony, one of the imam stood up and he said, "Oh, how dare you? You are a woman, and now you are teaching me my religion. I have taught people for the past 40 years. And it was opening ceremony of the conference, and it was really like a setback to my activity at the moment. But I know their language. I said, no, my brother, please. No, ever, never. I cannot give this permission to myself ever and ever, because I know you're a religious person. I respect you, I respect all of you. And I have invited you to share my problems with you. I'm here to learn from you." So that man changed. And now that imam has become one of the most active imam in our network. And I forgot to tell you that the program we started with Daisy Khan with 25 imams, now we are reaching to 6,000 imams. And now we are working in 22 provinces of Afghanistan. And if you are going to ask or check my documents, my organization documents, I haven't spent more than 100,000, 50,000 USD on this project. I have mobilized my community. I have given ownership and responsibility to my own people. If I have trained one imam, I put the responsibility. I have signed a memorandum of understanding with him that he is responsible to teach at least 25 other people. And the work I have done, it's only monitoring, collecting their reports, giving feedback to them. It takes almost 80% of my time because I don't have a special employee to do all of these, but I'm doing this on my own commitment. And thank God, now on voluntarily basis, we have a network in 22 provinces of Afghanistan. And the mob who killed a lady, Farkhunda, recently in Kabul, you might have heard that issue, that dilemma through the media. For the first time, imams came together on this street, and it was because of our mobilization. We never gave our name. We don't want to give them a sample, just we make them to do their own work, just like a facilitator. And this imam came with a huge number of other imams, and they said that that was an Islamic act. We never tolerate such an act. And we are also member of the civil society, which is for me a great achievement.
Wow. So while we're getting to the next questioner, I recall one of the imams told my program director who had gone to visit and meet with the imams, he said, you Americans should not have spent billions, you should have only spent millions on imams, and we would have been the shield against Taliban.
Hello. I taught for many years, and I trained teachers. And one of the problems that I would often have to train teachers to address is response to frustration. That so often when they would be frustrated in front of the class, they would become shrill and start shouting. And you would find the students who were opposed to them and got a great deal of pleasure out of saying, look, she's out of control. You have faced tremendous frustrations. I hear none of this shrill. I hear control. I hear a very sympathetic tone at all times. How did you learn to do this?
That is hope. Hope to have a better life for next generation of my country, for my children, and for the other children of my country. Usually I'm saying when I'm getting frustrated, I'm sick, Sally knows I have many health problems due to all these issues. Then I say, I'm not a God. Jamila, you're not a God to solve all the problems of the world. But as a human being, if you can reach to one, two, that is your responsibility. Do it in the best way. And I can say that dedication and commitment to my belief, to my principles, that is making me to re-stand after each trouble or obstacle I'm facing in my personal life and in my community life. Yeah, it's hope for a better future, for a better tomorrow.
Any other question?
I would like to know what kind of conflicts you encounter with women in terms of intergenerationally, a different social economic position. Where do the women stand with each other in terms of women's rights?
Yeah, we have lots of problem in that regard as well. Of course, those women who were ahead of us, a generation ahead of us, they are much more stronger, and through their social activity, they have reached to power. Like we have some women that from their NGO now they have reached to parliament, to high position in government. And mostly these are the ones who are occupying like big sum of money or big sum of income on the name of women in Afghanistan. And for us as a middle age generation or maybe middle group within this movement, like a group that we are working with lots of challenges and lots of issues, cannot find the bridge between us to that group that they're feeling ownership. And mostly donors are relying on those women because of their bigger history of relationship with donor and also their political position currently they have. Sometimes I feel that they have become gods of other women and they are putting symbol of yes or no, good or bad on rest of the women. And for young generation, as Dizi Khan was giving example of Iran, we are almost going to that scenario. We are having a larger number of young women coming from universities and from schools coming up. They want to have better life, and this generation are also we have gap in between. This generation thinks that they are more intelligent. They are, I believe they are, and they think that we or older women like can be a way of obstacle on their way. And like many times we are requesting them to join our some activity, but they think that there will be some donor race or some other issues. Thank God, in the past few months, we can see the situation is changing a bit. And one of the reasons is peace talk, which made all of us, in whichever position we are, that our future is going to be bargained. And now we are trying to come together and try to be united. And we have started a network by the name of Karama Network of Advocacy and Human Rights, and through that we have established youth committees. And we are working with community peace groups on provincial level. And in this youth committees, we have females and males to work for peace in their society, for betterment in their society. And they are growing up like as a symbol for the rest of the community. Like my students now, they are running, after couples of activity we had with them, now they are running radio station. Now they are owning their own newspaper. Now they have established their own NGO. The women we taught in Ghazni province, one center has changed to 16 centers right now. Now every woman is owning a community around her to teach new people coming to that area. So through these initiatives and involvement of imam and putting youths in connection with imams in several activities, especially on the issue of elimination of violence, we have got very good achievement. I can give you one example. Like sexual harassment is a major issue in Afghanistan, public sexual harassment. We work with our youth committees on that, and we found that our male youth committees feeling proud to harass more number of girls because it's part of their manhood and part of their honor. And even youths were betting with each other that how many girls you will harass, how many girls I will harass. And when we came back to our female youth committees and when we were talking to them, they were saying, we are afraid of a boy of 60 years old at the same level that we are afraid of a youth of 20 years old and an old man of 60 years old. In all level, harassment does exist. So after different trainings and awareness and Islamic teachings we changed the mentality of youths. And these youths, beside propagating with their other class fellows and other friends, they also went to each and every mosque in Ghazni province. And they start talking to imams that you should talk about this issue because it's a widespread and it's disturbing the life of each and every one of us. So this way they organized one Friday and all mosques in Ghazni start talking against sexual harassment from Islamic perspective. And it echoed very well in Ghazni province. Even the government came after us and said, how powerful you are working, who you are, from where you are coming, why you are not getting our permission. But I said, for God's sake, we are not doing something bad, and it's the issue of your family as well. And this is our social responsibility to that. So we, with our youths, working in the way that to build up our society. And now this youth committee has extended in 7 provinces. And these youth committees are very active agent of their society. When there is a flood, there is a war, they are going and helping people in the community. And we of course have the gaps, and hopefully slowly and gradually we will go to solve it.
I remember once there was an imam when the sermons were beginning and they heard all this nonsense talk about women's rights. I think one of the congregants said, where are you getting this stuff from? Which Western country has bribed you? Is America behind this? Well, little did they know America was behind it, in the sense that we Muslim women sitting in America were working in a stealth format with our sister across all the way in Afghanistan. So we know that the theological answers apply to almost every Muslim country. The solutions are the same. So to the extent that we can create the theological framework or the reinterpretation of it, sitting in the comfort of our safety net here, and spread that far and wide with our sisters across the world, that is the work that I think will have a significant impact, as it is already having in Afghanistan. I think also somebody talked about women's rights or women's groups being fragmented. When I first started the initiative in 2006, I noticed that it was a deep fragmentation within the Muslim women's movement that was preventing us from advancing. We were fragmented along so many lines. You know, there were the secular women, there were the traditionalist women, the conservative women, and then there were the faith-based feminist women, and everybody distrusted one another. And when we opened up the room and we created a vast canvas and we said, everybody's coming to this. Everybody's coming to this. Hijab or no hijab, secular, if you call yourself a Muslim and you're doing something for Muslim women and you are showing leadership in your community, we consider you to be, we consider your presence important. And that created this sort of bonding of women across the countries and across regions. And people began to see, why is the leveling field not leveling, why is the field not level? I remember at one of our conferences, we always began with a little bit of chant of the Quranic recitation from a woman. And these women from North Africa and the Gulf, they were saying, we didn't know women could recite. We were always told that we couldn't recite Quran. And yet they were women winning competitions, reciting Quran publicly in other countries. Women are officiating marriages in Egypt, whereas it would be unheard of for a woman to even be a judge in another country. But there are theological answers for all of these issues. And that is the work that I want to focus on, and with my sisters across the world, and share this with others. And if I could just take another few minutes to tell you something important that we're working on that we want to put in the hands of the Afghans, starting with Jamila, is we are very concerned about what's happening with ISIS. We are concerned about how they've been able to mobilize young people, particularly young women. There have been American young women who have everything at their disposal. They come from good families, they're highly educated, they have no rhyme or reason to jump on a plane, to go to another country, and to, become whatever, slaves of some men. But they're choosing to do that as an act of empowerment. Well, somebody has to stop that, because very soon it could become a trend. And Lisa, raise your hand. She always comes to me and she says, oh my God, look at this Twitter thingy, what these girls are just saying. I mean, it is a phenomena that is catching on like wildfire because of the access that they have on the internet. There are 9,600 terrorist websites. There's not a single website that does not counter this. Not a single one. Why haven't we all thought about doing something? And why hasn't the government done anything yet? So we've decided to actually do a community guide, which actually fleshes out the ideology of ISIS and shows how un-Islamic it is, just like when Jamila talked to the imams and showed them the book. We're going to bring the book out in September. So hopefully we want to get out into the country, all over the United States, spread it far and wide to everybody, and change the discourse about Islam in America, about Islam in the world, and how it's being hijacked by a very small fragment of people who have many reasons to revolt, and many political reasons, but there's no reason for them to use and abuse Islam as a justification for their acts. So with that, is there another question, or, oh, there is another question.
What is your relationship with your parents now?
Well, wonderful. Finally, my parents came to know that I'm the one on whom they can rely. My mother was sick for the past 3 years. She was suffering from dementia, and she was at my home because none of the sons were able to look after her. And she died in my lap, and I washed her body, and I took her to her funeral. It was all me, and now my father is relying on me. So, and now my brothers sending their daughters to school. And now my nieces, they are studying international relations. Usually I say, for God's sake, go and study something else. They say, no, we have to follow your footprints. So, yeah, now they have understood what is the reality on the ground.
Dr. Kitch, would you like to say a few words about something that we may have missed? I'm just going to give Dr. Kitch an opportunity to say a few.
Well, I do want to thank everyone. This has been a wonderful experience, and you're a great audience. I did want to say just one thing to bring the conversation back to the United States for a minute. I came away from doing this project, and of course I'm never going to leave it, and there will be more to come, with a feeling that Americans owe something to Afghan women. And I think that you've heard a little taste of what that is about by listening to Jamila tonight. There's a lot more in the book, so, and there's also the whole story of Marcia Bessel, who hoped to be here tonight by Skype, but wasn't able to do it at the last minute. But her story is also very compelling. It's very different. She has a different approach, but Jamila and she agreed on most things. When they didn't, I tried to capture that a little bit in the book. But these two perspectives, I think, really lay a foundation for understanding how we might think about this obligation to Afghan women. I would like to say that the book sales are all going to go to the two women to spend on their causes. So if that helps you think about purchasing the book, I would be very pleased. But I would like to end this by saying that as Americans, I think we want to think about how we could enact this obligation, supporting the kinds of things that Daisy does in her organization, supporting and honoring the kinds of things that Jamila does with pennies that have been so much more effective than the billions that our government has spent in Afghanistan. I think we have a responsibility to stand up and say, this is what we must do. And without the incorporation of women in our peacekeeping attempts, there will be no peace, and there will be no future for Afghanistan in particular. So I hope that you as a congregation, because you are so interested in social justice, might think about some actions that could be taken that could promote and help fulfill this obligation. Thank you again for having us.
I'd like to know from our guests their sense of the prospects for peace in Afghanistan, and following up on your comments, Sally, the American role in that peace process.
Well, I'm learning everything from Jamila and Marzia and people who are there and understand the situation. One thing we didn't say that we probably should say is that the women of activists of Afghanistan are not happy about the withdrawal of U.S. troops from the country. That seems precipitous. It seems like there won't be the international support for the foundations they have laid for the future well-being of the country in general, of its women in particular, and it feels like abandonment. And I think that our government has not paid enough attention to this problem and this dilemma. I worry that the so-called peacemaking process, which, as I said earlier, they predicted that this would happen eventually, is just going to be used as an excuse for further withdrawal and disengagement, and will not really fulfill the obligations of peacekeeping. One of the things that we could do, and I've written an op-ed piece about this, is we could be one of the few nations in the world, UN member nations in the world, to actually promote the use of UN Resolution 1325, which, as many of you may know, was passed in 2000, so before 2001, before any of this, and requires member states to incorporate women and make them central to reconciliation and peacemaking. And it's mostly honored in the breach. We have an opportunity right now to be in the forefront of that and to say, we stand up for UN Resolution 1325. We are going to make sure women are at any negotiation table. We are not going to empower the Taliban further. Jamila says this frequently, that we have empowered the Taliban by giving them this recognition. And what are we need to think about that and how we put people at the table and whom we empower and stand up for Resolution 1325. We could make a great contribution to world peace, I believe, if we stood up and did that. I think that the current negotiation process is, well, maybe a joke is too frivolous a word, but it strikes me that it's missing many boats, and I hope it doesn't go to fruition under its current state.
I will add a point, as you said, what will be role of U.S. government. You might know that the last election we had in 2014, it was one of the most corrupt elections in the world. It went 2 times, but every time the corruption was higher from each round. And with all these, United States of America come in and brought both of these corrupt leaders and formed a government by name of National Unity Government. But believe me, until they have come to power, the disunity has increased in Afghanistan. Because each one of them, the two-headed government, is backed and supported by many other heads, many other tribes and political powers. And everybody has their own agenda. For 6 months, they couldn't announce their cabinet because everybody wanted to have their own representation. And now these ministers are not able to announce their deputies. Every minister has to announce 4 deputies, and they are not able because everybody is having their own agenda. And I think instead of just creating short-term solution, it's better to take voice of people in consideration and respect them. Now, like when you go to Facebook, most of the comments are coming, they are saying, we feel ashamed of ourselves. Why we voted for you? People say to Abdullah, and people say to Ashraf Ghani as well. But when Ashraf Ghani had the presentation in your Senate, 15 times, maybe in whole history of United States, no such a president was welcomed. 15 times. They stood up on their foot and they were clapping for him. They might use very good words, but their practical activity are very, very far away from what they are saying. And the problems of Afghanistan cannot be solved by saying, it will be solved by doing. And I believe Afghanistan is our country. Whether Talib, whether government, we have to build our country. And we can build our country by power of men and women of the country. And we have to listen to them, and we should respect them, and we should give them part in this process to find out solution for themselves. And I hope in future the United States of America or any other country should not support all these corrupt warlords and politicians that out of use.
I actually love the way you say corrupt, because it sounds like another word when you say it. And we agree. No, it's perfect.
You know, when we left Afghanistan prematurely after the Soviet invasion, that vacuum was filled by Al-Qaeda and then Taliban, and so we've seen the destruction that they have done. And years later, we pulled out of Iraq and left a weak leader in power, and that vacuum has been filled by ISIS, and is that whole region is now breaking quickly between Syria and then one can't talk about peacemaking in Afghanistan and ignore what is going on in the region, because there are proxy wars being fought in the region between Iran and Saudi Arabia. There are chess games going on as to who is going to dominate the region. All of this is tied together, and this is why things are being negotiated away and women's rights are being negotiated away, because there are bigger players who are vying for bigger influence and bigger power in this region. I think that if we don't empower the people to stop the next 2 decades of this mayhem continuing, I think we will see an escalation of what we're already seeing. And many of us have become wise. We have learned over the years. We've also learned that it's very easy to transform the grassroots community and get it to stand up for itself. And Jamila said that she believes in, empowering their own people. She and I believe in the same verse of the Quran, which says, a condition of a people does not change unless you change what is in yourself. So self-empowerment, taking ownership of our own problems, working from within the community, and then spreading out and empowering each other. I think that is the work that is ahead of us. The governments are going to do what they do, the powers are going to do what they do, but at the grassroots levels, at least we can stabilize our communities and create a decent future for ourselves. And that is, I think, the work that is ahead of us. Thank you so much. And thank you very much.